Little girl saves cop and K9 trapped in burning car. What happens after? Will blow your mind. The cold came first, a sharp, needling cold that slipped through the seams of Mia Carter's jacket as she cut across the back trail behind Timber Valley Elementary. The winter storm had rolled in overnight, dropping a fresh blanket of snow thick enough to swallow the tips of her boots. At 11 years old, Mia walked this shortcut almost every morning, a quiet path through the pines that felt safer to her than the crowded main road. But today, the forest was wrong. Too still, too breathless, as if the trees were holding something they didn't want to release. She adjusted her backpack and quickened her steps. Her mother had already left for the early shift at the diner, promising pancakes for dinner if Mia got to school on time. But halfway down the ridge, the air split with a sound that didn't belong in any forest. A metallic groan, then a hiss, then another sharp pop like a bone snapping under pressure. Mia froze. Smoke, thick and black, rising between the trees ahead. She took one tentative step forward, then another, her breath turning shallow. As she rounded the curve of the trail, her stomach dropped so hard she nearly lost her footing. A police cruiser lay overturned against a cluster of fallen pines, the front end crushed inward like an aluminum can. Flames flickered along the hood, licking higher every second. Snow melted violently around it, turning the ground into steaming slush. Inside the shattered driver's window, a man slumped, unmoving, his face ghostly pale beneath blood and soot. His nameplate, half detached, read, Dalton. Reed Dalton. A uniformed Timber Valley officer Mia had seen once at a school safety assembly, tall and steady in a way that made kids trust him instantly. She had never seen someone look so breakable. A sudden explosion of sound made her jump. A bark raw and frantic, coming from the back compartment of the cruiser. A German shepherd shoved against the metal grate, frost clinging to his fur, eyes wide with panic and pain. His harness tag flashed through the smoke. K9 Thor. The dog barked again, hoarse, desperate. Mia stumbled closer. Her phone had no signal here. Everyone in town knew the ridge was a dead zone. The nearest house was a quarter-mile away. She was alone. Just her, the burning wreck, a bleeding officer, and a police dog trapped in a steel cage. The flames surged along the cracked windshield. The car shuddered as something inside gave way. The fire was spreading faster than she had time to think. Run. The instinct hit her first. But then Thor met her eyes. Not wild, not panicked, pleading. A sound tore from his throat, something between a whine and a command, the kind of sound that reached straight into her ribs and anchored her in place. Mia swallowed hard. Her hands trembled, but she stepped forward anyway. It felt like stepping into the mouth of a dragon. Heat blasted her face, the kind that stung skin instantly. She yanked on the back door handle. It didn't budge. Melted plastic fused it shut. Thor barked louder, slamming his shoulder against the grate. Mia backed up, grabbed a fallen branch, and swung it against the window. Once, twice. The glass spiderwebbed but didn't break. She tried again, putting her whole weight behind it. The window burst outward, shards scattering across the snow. Thor pushed his head through the opening, gasping cold air. Mia reached inside, fumbling for the latch. The heat bit into her arms, but she kept going. The lock clicked. The crate door gave. Thor launched out, staggering on unsteady legs. Then he did something Mia didn't expect. He didn't run. He turned back to the burning cruiser and barked at her, hard, insistent, pointing his muzzle toward Officer Dalton. Mia's heart hammered. The flames were already crawling toward the driver's side, wrapping around the steering column. She shouldn't go closer. She knew that. Any adult would scream at her not to. But Thor barked again, more urgent this time, as if he understood the seconds burning away with the fire. Mia pulled her scarf up to cover her nose and mouth. She braced herself, grabbed hold of the driver's side door, and yanked. It moved an inch, another. Hinges screeched under the heat. Thor lunged beside her, planting his paws and pulling with his teeth on the bottom edge of the crumpled door. Together, they dragged it open, just enough for Mia to squeeze through. Officer Dalton hung limp in the seat, his shoulder soaked in dark blood. The smell of gasoline and burning rubber closed in from every side. The flames had reached the center console, devouring it. Mia tugged at the seatbelt latch. It stuck. The overhead light flickered, then died. Outside, Thor growled low, pacing, ears pinned back. The forest felt suddenly alive again, whispering warnings between gusts of wind. Mia wedged her tiny hands between the belt and the buckle and pushed until her knuckles burned. Nothing. The fire cracked louder. A fresh plume of smoke surged in her face. She coughed, eyes watering. Then a sound, faint but clear, made her freeze. Footsteps. Not hers, not Thor's. Slow, crunching through snow, approaching the wreck. Someone was out there. Someone who didn't want Officer Dalton found. Mia's heart slammed against her ribs. She didn't dare look back. She pushed harder on the buckle until something snapped. The belt came free. Dalton sagged forward. Thor barked, sharp and warning, turning in the direction of the footsteps. No time. Mia hooked her arms under Dalton's, braced her heels in the seat, and pulled with everything she had. He slid halfway out. Thor grabbed Dalton's sleeve in his teeth and helped drag him the rest of the way. They stumbled into the snow just as the cruiser's interior erupted with a deep, guttural boom that sent a wave of heat rolling past them. Mia fell to her knees. Thor circled them protectively, head low, tail stiff, a growl vibrating deep in his chest. Behind the rising column of smoke, the footsteps stopped. Silence. Then a voice, low and cold, carried across the trees. So the kid got to him first. Thor snapped his head toward the sound, snarling. Mia's breath caught. She didn't know who the man was. She didn't know why he sounded like he expected to find Dalton dead. She only knew one thing. If she didn't move right now, the man would come back to finish what he started. Thor nudged her shoulder, urging her up. She grabbed Dalton's wrist, adrenaline pushing her forward. Together, she and the K9 heaved the wounded officer into the cover of the trees. The snow closed around them, swallowing their footprints almost as fast as they made them. Mia's lungs burned, her legs shook, but she kept going. Somewhere behind them, the unseen man cursed, then started running. Thor barked once, sharp and commanding, as if telling her to stay close. Mia obeyed. The burning car cast its last flare of orange into the white forest before collapsing in on itself. And in that fiery glow, Mia Carter realized something she would remember for the rest of her life. Today she wasn't just a kid on her way to school. She was the only light left between a wounded cop, a loyal K9, and a danger far colder than the snow. Snow swirled around them in frantic circles, the forest shifting from white silence to a battlefield of heat and smoke. Mia Carter struggled through the drifting powder, her small boots slipping as she dragged the dazed German shepherd toward the cover of a fallen pine. Thor staggered beside her, muscles trembling, breath choppy from smoke inhalation, but still alert enough to stay glued to her side. His presence steadied her, like a hand gripping hers in the dark. When they reached the shelter of the tree, Thor shook violently, flinging melting snow from his fur. Mia didn't have time to rest. The roar of the fire behind her grew louder, turning the wrecked cruiser into a furnace. Reed Dalton was still inside. She spun back, heart thundering. Every instinct said run. Every survival video her mum made her watch screamed to keep distance from a burning car. But Reed's face flashed in her mind, pale and slack in the smoke. He would die if she didn't act. Thor barked once, sharp, urgent, as if echoing the same truth. Mia bolted for the cruiser. The flames clawed higher along the roof, sparks snapping at the wind. Heat slapped her across the face the moment she got close. Her eyes burned. She yanked her scarf tighter around her mouth and reached for the hiking stick strapped to her backpack. Her hands shook as she slid it free. She jammed the wooden stick into the warped gap between the frame and the passenger door. It barely moved. She planted her feet, angled all her weight, and pulled. The stick creaked under the pressure. The metal gave a little. Not enough. The nearest flames swept downwind toward her sleeve. She jerked back, ripped off her jacket, and slammed it over the fire creeping along the lower doorframe. The fabric sizzled, filling the air with the smell of burnt nylon, but the flames receded long enough for her to try again. Thor limped to her side. He pressed his shoulder against the metal, letting out a guttural growl as he forced his weight into the frame. It didn't budge much, but it was enough. Mia wedged the stick deeper, teeth clenched, sweat freezing on her forehead. The door popped open a painful inch. Inside, Officer Reed slumped sideways, barely conscious. His face had gone grey-blue. Smoke curled around him like a living thing. The seatbelt strap cut across his chest, tight as iron. Mia reached in, fingers brushing the buckle, but it was melted into the latch. There was no way it would release. A sudden crack split the air. The windshield spidered further. The fire was eating through the engine. They had seconds. Thor lunged past her. He pushed his massive head through the narrow space and sniffed frantically along Reed's torso until he found the seatbelt strap near the buckle. His jaws closed around it. He bit down hard, once, twice. The fibers strained but held. Mia pressed her hands under his jaw to steady him, her fingers brushing his trembling throat. Just as she feared the belt would never break, Thor jerked sideways with a violent twist. The strap snapped. Reed slumped forward, the weight of his body tipping into Mia's arms. She almost fell backward with him. Thor barked urgently, nudging her towards the trail. Mia dragged Reed out, inch by inch. His boots scraped the snow. Smoke gusted over them again, thick enough to blot out the trees. Then came the sound she dreaded, a deep, low rumble beneath the car, the kind of sound you feel before you hear, a warning that something buried in the engine was about to give. Thor whined sharply. Mia braced. The world exploded. The force lifted her off her feet, flinging her backward into the snow. Thor hit beside her, rolling once before scrambling upright. Reed landed half on her legs, heavy and limp. A shower of burning debris rained down across the clearing. Embers sizzled where they hit the snow. Mia's ears rang so loudly the forest disappeared. Everything slowed. Just a long, painful stretch of white and heat and frantic breathing. Thor limped over and pressed his head into her shoulder, checking her, nudging her face with his nose until she blinked back into awareness. She pushed up on her elbows. Reed's uniform was scorched near the collar. Blood seeped through the fabric at his shoulder, dark and spreading. She reached to wipe soot from his shirt, and her fingers paused. Under the tear in the fabric was not just burn damage. It was a wound. Circular, clean entry, not made by shrapnel. Reed Dalton had been shot before the crash. Mia's breath caught. A cold fear coiled under her ribs. This wasn't an accident. Someone had come after him, and Thor had been trapped with him. Her gaze darted to the trees, a flicker of movement, a figure slipping behind a line of pines, tall, dark coat, watching. Thor saw it too. His posture stiffened, ears forward, a growl rising from deep in his chest, raw and promising violence. The man stepped partly into view. He wasn't rushing toward them. He wasn't helping. He was observing, tracking, confirming. Mia felt something icy slide down the length of her spine. He was making sure Reed was dead. She swallowed down panic and gripped Thor's collar. Reed needed help. They needed to disappear now. The man turned slightly, as if listening to something Mia couldn't hear. Then he melted back into the woods, vanishing between the snow-laden trunks. Thor pressed himself closer to Mia, growling in the direction the man had gone, but she tugged him back. "Come on, help me." Together, girl and dog heaved Reed's unconscious body across the snow. Thor supported the officer's weight with his shoulder, nudging, guiding, watching their surroundings with relentless focus. His training poured through every move. Mia looked back only once. The cruiser burned in the center of the trees, flames clawing at the sky, black smoke coiling upward like a signal flare. But somewhere beyond the blaze, in the shadowed line of the ridge, the figure still lingered. She couldn't see him, but she felt him, a presence like a breath on the back of her neck. He wasn't done. And Mia Carter understood something she never had to understand before. Saving a life had made her a witness, and someone out there didn't intend to let witnesses walk away. For a while there was only the sound of breathing, ragged, uneven, too shallow to be safe. Mia knelt in the snow, her knees numb, Officer Reed's head resting awkwardly in her lap. His eyes were barely slits, lashes crusted with frost and ash. His lips moved sometimes, but nothing came out. Thor lay curled tight against his side, chest heaving, ears pricked toward the forest, as if listening for a danger Mia could not see. She looked at the burned-out cruiser, a wrecked skeleton just visible through the trees. The main blast was over, the worst of the flames starting to shrink, but the metal still glowed in some places. Steam rose where snow met hot debris. The air smelled like melted plastic and bad dreams. Reed needed more than a kid and a dog in the snow. Mia's mind scrambled through everything she knew: her mom's first aid training videos, the safety poster in the school nurse's office, the time she scraped her knee and got mad because the antiseptic stung. Pressure, bandage, warmth, elevate if you can. She had none of that here. Her gaze snagged on the twisted cruiser again. Police cars had first aid kits. One had to still be inside. Thor lifted his head as if reading her thoughts. His amber eyes met hers, wary and questioning. "Stay," she told him. "Watch him. I'll be right back." She did not know if K9s understood English that way, but Thor seemed to. He let out a low huff and pressed his body closer against Reed, as if pinning him to the earth by sheer will. Mia pushed herself to her feet. Every step back toward the wreck went against instinct. The heat was still intense, enough to sting her face even from a distance. She picked her way around chunks of metal and shattered glass, boots sinking deep into slush where snow had melted, then refrozen. The back end of the cruiser had taken less damage. The roof was half peeled away like the lid of a can, but the trunk and rear seats were mostly intact. Smoke curled from the frame, but no flames licked there now. She climbed in as far as she dared, one hand over her mouth, eyes stinging. The emergency kit should be near the rear compartment, maybe strapped down. Her fingers brushed plastic. She grabbed a red case and yanked it free. The white cross on the lid was streaked with soot, but it was still sealed. She almost climbed out right then. Almost. It was the way the backseat cushion sat crooked that made her pause, like someone had lifted it and dropped it in a hurry. A small corner of metal gleamed from the gap, awkward and out of place. Not trash, not part of the car. Something else. Mia hesitated. The heat made her head feel light, but something inside her, the same stubborn core that had dragged a full-grown officer through the snow, told her to look. She wedged her fingers under the seat edge and lifted. Taped there, wrapped in a tight loop of grey duct tape, was a small metal drive. It was no bigger than her thumb, made of brushed steel with a tiny stamped emblem at one end. FBI. The letters were small but unmistakable. Mia's mouth went dry. She had seen that logo before on TV when her mum watched crime shows. Not on real things, not in her hands. For a second she thought she must be wrong. Why would something from the FBI be taped under a local cop's back seat in Timber Valley, Colorado? Then she remembered the man in the trees, the way he had watched, not helped, the gunshot wound in Reed's shoulder. This was not about their little town. This was bigger. She ripped the drive free and stuffed it into the front pocket of her jeans, deep and tight until she could feel the cold shape pressed against her skin. She grabbed the first aid kit and scrambled out of the wreck. Behind her, a piece of metal gave way and clattered into the snow. The sound echoed too loudly in the empty woods. Mia ran. By the time she reached Reed and Thor again, her lungs burned. She dropped to her knees, snapped open the kit, and dug for anything useful. Gauze, tape, scissors. A thermal blanket folded into a tight silver square. Reed stirred when she pressed the gauze against his shoulder. A low groan slipped out, torn from somewhere deep. His eyes fluttered open to thin slits. "Hey," she whispered, trying to sound braver than she felt. "You're okay. I mean, you're not okay, but you're here. Stay with me." His gaze focused slowly, struggling to catch on her face. Smoke still clung to her hair. Soot streaked her cheeks. She must have looked like a kid who had run through hell. His hand jerked weakly toward his chest. His fingers brushed at thin air, searching for something that was no longer there. "Pocket," he rasped. His voice sounded like gravel. "Front pocket." Mia's hand flew to her own jeans, feeling the weight of the drive. She swallowed. "I found it," she said. "Is this what you mean?" He blinked hard, like he was fighting his way through water. "Don't let them—" His words broke on a cough. Thin blood flecked his lips. Then he forced the rest out. "Don't let them take it. They'll kill us all." The phrase landed in her chest like a stone. Us. Not just him. Not just cops. All. "Who is them?" she whispered, but his head tipped sideways, consciousness slipping again. His breath turned shallow and uneven. Thor whined and pressed his muzzle into Reed's chest, sensing the drop. Mia wrapped the gauze tighter, hands moving faster now. She layered bandages until the bleeding slowed, then tucked the thermal blanket around his torso. She wished she had more. A heater. An ambulance. A grown-up. Instead, she had a secret drive in her pocket and a K9 watching her like she was the one in charge. The wind shifted. The smell of exhaust floated on it, faint but clear. Not from the cruiser, from somewhere farther off, down the ridge. Thor's head snapped up. His ears locked in one direction. A deep growl rolled through him, starting in his chest and vibrating all the way into the snow. Mia froze. Out here, in this narrow valley, sound travelled strange. But she heard it now. The low rumble of an engine, rhythm steady, climbing slowly. The man in the trees had not left for long. "We have to move," she said. She scanned the forest, searching her memory. There was a maintenance road that cut parallel to the trail, and just off it, an old supply shed. She had seen it once on a hike with her mum, a sagging structure of tin and wood, half swallowed by brush. Mums always said to stay away, that the floor might be rotten. Right now, rotten was still better than open snow. Mia shifted beside Reed and got her shoulder under his arm. "Come on. Help me," she told Thor. Thor obeyed without hesitation. He rose, wedged his body against Reed's other side, and leaned his weight into the officer, helping lift him. Between the two of them, they managed to get Reed partly upright. Step by step, they dragged him through the trees, away from the burning wreck and the growing sound of the approaching vehicle. The snow tried to swallow their feet. Reed's boots carved deep trenches. Mia's muscles screamed. Her fingers went numb around his wrist. Thor grunted softly with every push, but he never backed away. His eyes flicked constantly between Reed's face and the edge of the forest, guarding both directions at once. The engine noise grew clearer, then faded as whoever drove chose a different angle up the ridge, probably following the main tire tracks left, from the cruiser's path. Good, she thought. Look there, not here. After what felt like an hour and might have been 10 minutes, the trees thinned. The maintenance road appeared, a flat line of packed snow, barely wide enough for a truck. Beyond it, half buried under a tangle of dead branches, was the shed. Up close, it looked worse than she remembered. The wood was warped, the roof sagging on one side, one hinge hanging loose from the door. A faded sign warned of danger that had nothing to do with what was really coming. Mia kicked snow from the threshold and shoved the door. It creaked open with a long, miserable groan, revealing darkness and the stale smell of old gasoline and dust. Inside, broken crates leaned against the walls. A rusted snowblower slumped in one corner. Strings of cobwebs draped from rafters like abandoned decorations. It was perfect. They dragged Reed in and lowered him as gently as they could onto a stack of folded tarps. Thor circled once, testing the space, then lay down against the officer's side again, his body forming a wall between Reed and the door. Mia shut the door until only a small gap let in light. Her chest rose and fell so fast it hurt. Sweat had cooled on her neck and made her shiver. For a moment, she let herself breathe. Just breathe. Then she heard it again. The engine. Closer now. Tires crunching slowly, carefully on snow outside. Whoever was up there was not rushing, not panicked. He was searching. The truck slowed, stopped. Mia held her breath without meaning to. Thor's ears pricked, every muscle going taut. He lifted his head, eyes locked on that sliver of light at the bottom of the door. The drive in Mia's pocket suddenly felt very heavy. Outside, footsteps hit the road. One set. Unhurried. Confident. Boots. They crunched toward the trees, toward the trail that led down to where the cruiser had burned. There was a pause, a muttered curse, then the footsteps changed direction. Pacing. Following something. Tracks, Mia thought. He found our tracks. She wrapped both hands around the cool metal of the rescue drive through her jeans. Her heart hammered so loud she was sure Thor could hear it. Maybe the man outside could too. Thor made a low sound, not quite a growl, not quite a whine, something in between. A question, almost. What now? Mia did not know, but as the footsteps drew closer to the shed, unsteady but purposeful, and a shadow flickered against the narrow slit of light under the door, she realized one more thing. Saving Reed had pulled her into a story that was already in motion, and the man who had started it was outside, finally closing in. The footsteps outside faded only after what felt like a lifetime, swallowed by the thick woods and the settling snow. Mia waited until the last vibration vanished, counting to 40 under her breath before daring to move. Thor held his position longer, head low, eyes fixed on the door as if he could see straight through it. Only when he finally exhaled did Mia feel her body unlock. Reed needed real help. The shed wasn't safe. The man searching for them would eventually double back, and when he did, Reed wouldn't survive another chase. Mia wiped her palms on her jeans, smeared with smoke and dirt, and stood. "Stay with him," she whispered to Thor, "just for a minute." Thor answered with a low rumble, but he didn't protest. He lowered his head and rested it gently on Reed's chest, watching Mia with eyes that warned her not to take too long. Mia slipped out through the back of the shed, using a gap warped by weather and time. The cold hit her face like a slap, clean and sharp. She moved fast across the service road, staying low, her breath short puffs that vanished into the trees. She needed someone who could call for real help, someone who wasn't part of whatever danger Reed had been dragged into. Only one person came to mind. Wade. Everyone in Timber Valley knew Wade Hargrove, though few saw him anymore. He lived past the ridge in a run-down cabin tucked behind a row of old aspens. He'd once been a firefighter, the kind who ran into burning buildings without blinking. But after the fire that killed his crew 15 years earlier, Wade disappeared from the world. He kept to himself, avoided town, spoke only to kids who wandered too deep into his section of the woods to remind them not to fall through the old mining shafts. Mia didn't know him well, but he was the only adult she trusted to be close enough to reach and brave enough to help. The forest thickened as she descended, branches brushing her jacket, snow falling in soft clumps from overloaded limbs. Every sound made her flinch. A distant snap, a crow's cry, the muffled hum of an engine somewhere far behind her. When Wade's cabin came into view, smoke curling gently from its chimney, relief nearly buckled her knees. She ran up the rickety steps and pounded on the door. Wade cracked it open almost instantly, as if he had been expecting something terrible. His weathered face tightened the moment he saw her. The man always carried a look like he'd been holding his breath for years. "Mia Carter?" he said, voice low and gravelly. "What in God's name are you doing out here in this storm?" "There's been an accident," she blurted. "Officer Dalton. He's hurt. Really bad. And someone's out there looking for him." The old firefighter's eyes sharpened in an instant. "Dalton. Reed Dalton." Mia nodded, breath shaking. Wade pushed the door open wider and gestured her inside. The cabin smelled of pine logs and old books. He grabbed his coat and a first aid pack that looked military grade. "Show me," he said. They trekked back through the woods, Mia leading, Wade moving fast despite his age. He didn't ask questions on the walk, but his jaw twitched, and the grip on his pack tightened every time she mentioned the cruiser or the man hunting them. When they reached the shed, Wade paused, listening. Only the wind answered. Thor must have sensed the shift in air because he gave a sharp bark from inside, not fearful, but alert. Wade stepped in, and the moment Thor laid eyes on him, the dog stopped barking. He stared hard, tail stiff. Not aggression. Recognition. A memory Mia couldn't see. Wade froze too, breath catching as if he'd been punched. "That dog." His voice dropped to a whisper. "That's Vance's old K9. Mia blinked, but Reed said Thor was his partner. Wade crouched, watching Thor closely. Thor did not return to a defensive stance. Instead, he stared at Wade with something like defiance. "That dog used to belong to Logan Vance," Wade said quietly. But it didn't work out. Vance had him trained through a private contractor for security on his mountain estate. Didn't treat him right. Thor bit one of Vance's men. Word around town was the dog got reassigned after that. Guess Dalton became his handler. Thor made a sound between a growl and a protest, as if correcting Wade's version of events. "This isn't just an accident, is it?" Mia whispered. "Someone shot Officer Dalton, and they were following us." Wade didn't answer immediately. He lifted the bandage Mia had wrapped and examined Reed's shoulder. His expression turned grim. "This is a clean shot. Professional. Not a panicked ambush. Someone wanted him dead." Reed stirred, voice barely a breath. "Wade, that you?" Wade's eyebrows shot up. He leaned close. "Reed, you stubborn fool! What kind of mess are you mixed up in?" Reed blinked, eyes glassy with pain. "USB. Mia, protect." He reached weakly for his chest again, but Mia placed the drive in Wade's hand. He stared at the steel casing, the FBI seal etched into the metal, and his entire body went still. "This isn't just evidence," Wade murmured. "This is federal-level encryption. Who the hell did you cross, Dalton?" Reed's voice was thin. "Vance. Logan Vance." Mia watched the name hit Wade like a blow. He stood abruptly, pacing once. Vance has half the town under his thumb. The businesses, the sheriff's friends, the contractors. He's been buying land for years, but this... He held the drive between two fingers as if it were something dangerous. What's on this? Reed coughed, grimacing from the pain. Proof. Shipping manifests, illegal weapons, smuggling routes. Vance is running guns across state lines and using Timber Valley as a cover. I was supposed to pass this to the Bureau tonight. Mia's heart thudded harder. Guns, smuggling, FBI. It felt too big for a little town tucked into Colorado's mountains. Wade set the drive down gently, then looked at Mia. And you walked right into the middle of it. She swallowed. I didn't mean to. I just saw the car. I heard Thor. Thor lifted his head proudly, as if to confirm he had called her on purpose. Wade knelt in front of Mia, his face lined with concern. You saved this officer's life, and you saved that dog. But the man hunting you won't stop until he finds this drive. And makes sure no one talks. The shed suddenly felt colder, smaller. Wade looked at Thor again. No wonder Vance wants Dalton dead. That dog saw everything. Thor growled deeply, the sound vibrating through the wooden floor. The hairs along his spine stood up, his gaze locked on the door like he was expecting the killer to burst in at any moment. Mia took a slow breath, steadying her shaking hands. What do we do now? Wade didn't answer right away. He scanned the forest through the small gap in the door. Snow drifted in lazy spirals, peaceful in a way that didn't match the fear gripping Mia's chest. We don't go to the sheriff, Wade finally said. Too many of Vance's people in that office. If they know Dalton is still alive, they'll finish the job. We need to get you three deeper into cover. Before Mia could respond, Thor jerked his head sharply towards the window. His ears shot forward. A low growl rumbled from his chest, darker than before. Mia's blood turned to ice. Wade's voice dropped. Someone's close. Thor stood, placing himself between Mia and the door. Then came the sound that confirmed everything. A twig snapping. Slow steps, someone circling the shed. Mia pressed a hand to Thor's shoulder. His muscles were coiled tight as steel. Wade grabbed her wrist, his voice barely above a whisper. Get ready. We're not alone anymore. Snow fell in slow sheets as Wade led Mia and Thor through a narrow cut in the trees. Reed slumped between them, barely conscious. The storm had dulled into a heavy quiet, the kind that made every small sound echo too loudly. Mia's breath puffed in short bursts as she helped Wade drag Reed up a hidden incline toward a cabin so old it looked like the mountain had grown around it. Wade pushed open the door with his shoulder. Inside, the air smelled of dust and old pine. A rusted stove sat in one corner, a cot in another, and a stack of blankets folded under a broken window. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. Set him down, Wade said, lowering Reed onto the cot. Thor rushed beside the officer, nudging his hand with his nose, whining low as if trying to shake him awake. Reed's eyes fluttered at the sound. Easy, buddy, Wade murmured. He turned to Mia. Hand me that lantern. Mia lit it, the warm glow casting flickering shadows across the cabin walls. The sound of the storm outside faded. For a moment it felt like they were safe. Then Reed gasped awake, body jolting. Thor immediately pressed closer. Reed grabbed Wade's wrist, grip surprisingly strong for someone on the brink of unconsciousness. Did you grab it? He rasped. Wade reached into his pocket and held up the steel USB. Right here. Reed exhaled shakily, sinking back into the cot. His voice trembled, but not from weakness. They're going to kill anyone connected to it. Mia stepped closer, hugging her arms around herself. Why? What's on it? Reed's eyes lifted to Mia, and for the first time since she'd found him, she saw fear in an officer's face. Not panic, something deeper. Because I was about to send this to a federal task force tonight. Proof of Vance's whole operation. The weapons, the routes, the payoff lists. Everything. Wade froze. So the rumors were true? He whispered. Reed nodded. He has people in the sheriff's department. Dispatch, too. That's why nobody came when the cruiser went dark. The call never left the building. Mia's stomach dropped. You mean, if I had called 911? Reed gave a bitter laugh that cracked like ice. They would have sent the wrong kind of help. Thor growled, pacing once before sitting near the door, ears pinned forward. His body was tight with tension, as if he expected the world to crack open again. Wade kept his voice low. What happened out there? The car didn't just crash. Reed swallowed, his breath shallow. I was leaving the station. My shift was over. I'd swapped vehicles so no one would spot the marked unit heading toward Boulder. I was halfway down the ridge when Thor alerted. He caught the scent of ammonium and metal near the chassis. He paused, eyes sharp with the memory. Explosives. Someone wired the underside of the SUV. He barked, tried to pull me away from the driver's seat. I barely had time to brace before the blast. Mia stiffened. So Thor saved you twice. Reed reached out and rested his hand on Thor's back. The dog leaned into the touch, but his gaze stayed pinned to the door like a sentinel carved from stone. Thor's the reason I'm alive. He always knows before I do. The officer winced and touched his bandaged shoulder. And the gunman? He waited until the explosion to take the shot. Wanted it to look like I died in the crash. Wade rubbed his hands across his face. Vance sent professionals. This isn't intimidation. This is cleanup. Mia felt a cold ripple climb up her spine. The storm, the forest, the crash, all of it suddenly seemed smaller compared to the truth laid bare in that dim cabin. What are they trying to hide so badly? She whispered. Reed closed his eyes, breathing through the pain. Millions in hardware going missing. M4s, tactical gear, thermal scopes, smuggled through Timber Valley's shipping yards. Vance uses his outdoor equipment company as a front. Everything gets disguised as hunting shipments. The sheriff's deputy signs off on clean manifests. Nobody checks twice. Wade muttered a curse under his breath. The town's been sleeping next to a powder keg for years. Reed opened his eyes and pointed weakly at the drive. That has time stamps, voice recordings, warehouse footage. Faces, contracts, enough to bury him for good. Mia stared at the little metal stick, suddenly understanding its weight. So, if he gets it back, he'll erase everything, and kill anyone who touched it. Silence settled, heavy, suffocating. Then Thor's head snapped toward the far wall, ears straightened like antennas. His body stiffened, tail stiff, hackles rising slowly. Wade looked over sharply. What is it? Thor moved one step toward the window, then another. His nose twitched once, twice. A low, warning growl rumbled in his chest. Mia felt her heartbeat slam against her ribs. He hears something, she whispered. Wade grabbed the lantern and pushed it lower, dimming the cabin. He stepped to the window and peeked through the crack in the warped wood. Snow drifted lazily outward, but the air held a wrong kind of stillness. Reed struggled to sit up. You need to move, he hissed. If Thor's reacting, someone's close. Wade motioned Mia behind him. Stay low. Don't move unless I tell you. Then the forest exhaled, the crunch of boots on snow. Slow, calculated. Thor bared his teeth silently. Mia held her breath, gripping the edge of the cot. Another step. Closer. Then a shadow moved behind the frosted window. Mia's lungs tightened. A man's voice carried through the wood, muffled but unmistakably calm. I know you're in there. Wade reached for the old shotgun mounted on the wall. Another pause. The soft metallic click of a round chambering. Thor didn't wait for commands. He lunged towards the door, positioning himself squarely between the danger and Mia. The voice outside spoke again. "You should have stayed out of it, Dalton." Reed's eyes widened. "That's Sawyer. Vance's triggerman. He's the one who shot me." A heartbeat later, everything erupted. A bullet ripped through the wooden door, splintering it inches from Thor's head. Mia screamed and dropped to the floor. Thor lunged with a savage snarl, barking so loudly the walls seemed to shake. Wade fired back, the cabin filling with smoke and recoil. Reed forced himself upright, teeth clenched against the pane. "Mia! Thor! Run!" But Thor didn't budge, not an inch. He stood planted like a wall of muscle and fury, daring the darkness outside to try him again. Mia stared at him, breath shaking. "He's not leaving us," she whispered. Outside, a second figure moved through the snow. Then another. More than one. Reed's voice dropped to a whisper, urgent and raw. "They found us." Thor growled louder, deeper, preparing for the next shot. And Mia realized the truth with sudden clarity. Thor wasn't just guarding Reed anymore, he was guarding her. The cabin door splintered again under a second shot, wood chips exploding across the floor. Ward grabbed Mia's arm, pulling her toward the back exit. Thor stayed planted at the front, barking with a force that echoed through the winter air like a warning siren. "Go, Mia." "Now," Reed hissed, his voice raw with pain. Wade shoved open the rear hatch, exposing a narrow trail carved through pine and snow. The cold hit them like a wall, but there was no choice. Mia followed Wade into the darkness, her boots sinking deep into the icy crust. Thor bolted after them, circling to flank as if herding a fragile pack. Behind them, Sawyer's voice cut through the trees. "Dalton, you can't run forever." Reed staggered out next, leaning against the doorframe for balance, then limped into the open with his cig held. Tight, every step looked like agony, but quitting wasn't in him. They sprinted downhill, breath burning, snow whipping their faces. Branches lashed at Mia's arms. Wade shielded her with his body as gunfire cracked behind them. Thor barked sharply, veering left. Mia didn't question. She followed his lead, trusting his instincts more than her own. Another shot. The bullet slapped into a tree inches from her head. Mia choked on a gasp. "They're gaining on us," Wade muttered. Reed turned abruptly, planting his feet despite the pain, and fired 2 precise shots into the tree line. A voice screamed. A body fell. "Keep moving!" He yelled. But for every man Reed dropped, another shadow emerged. Vance had sent more than a cleanup crew this time. This was a hunt. Snow thickened around them, swallowing sound. Mia tried to stay low, her hands shaking so violently she could barely keep her footing. Thor pressed close to her leg, nudging her whenever she drifted too far from cover. Up ahead, a fallen pine created a narrow choke point between 2 ridges. Wade helped Mia through first. That's when they heard it. A scream. Not a cry of fear, but pain. "Wade!" Mia gasped, turning. A man had grabbed her from the side, his gloved hand clamping around her wrist. "Got her!" he shouted to the others. She struggled, kicking, but the man was stronger. He dragged her toward the ridge's edge, gun drawn. Thor launched at him with terrifying speed. The shepherd hit him full force, jaws clamping onto the man's arm. The attacker shrieked, losing his grip on Mia. She stumbled back into the snow. Thor yanked again, teeth sinking deeper, forcing the man to drop his weapon. The attacker tried to bash Thor with his elbow, but the shepherd held firm, eyes filled with fury and intent. The forest roared with motion then. A second gunman burst through the trees, rifle raised. Mia froze. Thor wouldn't be fast enough this time. A single gunshot cracked through the air. But the bullet didn't come from the gunman. It came from behind him. The rifleman jerked, his weapon falling uselessly into the snow. Standing behind him was Brent Carver, a young officer from the Timber Valley Sheriff's Office. His breath came out in heavy clouds, his expression twisted with conflict. Mia recognized him immediately. She'd seen him directing traffic near the school, holding doors for elderly neighbors, smiling shyly at everyone. But now his face was pale, almost sickly. Thor released the first attacker, who fled limping into the shadows. Brent stepped toward Mia, hands held up as if approaching a deer caught in a trap. "Easy, kid," he whispered. "I'm not here to hurt you." Wade aimed his rifle at the young man. "Step closer, and I put you down." Brent swallowed, raising both palms. "You don't understand. I didn't sign up for this. Vance owns half the department. Sawyer told us this was a standard track job. I didn't know they were going after a child." Another shot exploded from the ridge. Brent flinched and shoved Mia behind a tree, protecting her with his own body. "I'm not letting them kill her," he hissed. Wade's eyes narrowed. "Why help us now?" Brent's voice cracked. "Because I didn't join the force to be someone's gun, and because I've been sick of watching Vance break this town piece by piece." The forest erupted again as Sawyer and 2 more gunmen advanced through the snow. "There they are," Sawyer bellowed. Brent spun, firing a warning shot that kicked up snow at Sawyer's boots. "Back off!" Sawyer laughed, almost amused. Carver, I knew you didn't have the stomach for this." He lifted his rifle. Brent moved without hesitation, pushing Mia to Wade's side. "Run!" A shot rang out. Brent jerked, a bloom of red spreading across his shoulder. He fell to one knee but forced himself up again, teeth gritted. Mia screamed his name. Thor lunged forward, placing himself between Brent and the advancing gunman, snarling with brutal intensity. The dog's presence alone caused Sawyer to hesitate a fraction of a second. It was all Reed needed. From behind, the wounded officer fired 3 clean shots. One hit a gunman square in the chest, dropping him instantly. Another knocked Sawyer's rifle from his hands, sending it skidding across the ice. Sawyer ducked behind a tree, cursing. Reed limped forward, breath heavy but aim steady. "We're ending this, Sawyer." Sawyer laughed, wiping blood from his lip. You can barely stand." Reed fired again, the shot grazing Sawyer's arm, forcing him back behind cover. Thor surged ahead, barking violently, forcing Sawyer to reposition. Wade grabbed Mia's hand. Move now while they're pinned." They scrambled toward the next ridge, dragging Brent with them. The young officer winced, but didn't resist. Reed stayed behind, exchanging gunfire with the last of Vance's men in a fierce, echoing duel. The snowy forest flashed with muzzle light, every shot carving new rage into the darkness. Thor circled back, checking Mia with a quick nudge before sprinting to Reed's side, howling loud enough to shake the trees. Mia glanced back, heart clenched. Reed stood alone in the snow, framed by pines and smoke, trading bullets with a man who wanted him buried in that forest. He didn't look afraid. He looked ready. Wade tightened his grip on her shoulder. "We have to trust him." Mia didn't argue, but as another shot cracked through the sky, one truth settled heavy in her chest. Thor wasn't just fighting for Reed anymore, he was fighting for her life, too. The storm had thinned into a pale morning mist by the time Mia, Wade, and Brent reached the rocky overlook above the ravine. Their breaths rose like smoke in the freezing air. Behind them, the distant echo of gunfire faded, replaced by Thor's furious barking somewhere deep in the gorge. Wade pressed a trembling hand against the bullet wound on Brent's shoulder, trying to slow the bleeding. "Stay with us, kid." Brent gritted his teeth. "Just make sure she gets out alive." Mia tightened her grip on Wade's rescue flashlight, its metal cold against her palm. Wade crouched beside her, adjusting the dial until the beam sharpened into a clean white column. "You remember what I taught you?" Wade whispered. Mia nodded, heart hammering. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short SOs. Her fingers moved instinctively, flicking the light on and off in the precise rhythm. It flashed across the ridge, disappearing into the white haze that clung to the mountain tops. She repeated it, again and again. Finally, Wade caught her wrist. Enough! If anyone's listening, they've got it by now. A crack of gunfire exploded from below. Mia jerked her head towards the ravine. Thor! She was running before Wade could stop her. At the bottom of the slope, Reed struggled to reload his weapon with one hand. Blood dripped down his sleeve, staining the snow at his boots. Across from him, Sawyer leveled his rifle, breath steaming through clenched teeth. His coat was ripped, his mask half torn off, revealing the twisted sneer beneath. You should have stayed out of this, Dalton. Reed steadied himself, jaw tight. Funny. I was thinking the same thing about you. But before Sawyer could squeeze the trigger, a blur of tan and black shot through the mist. Thor crashed into him, teeth clamping onto his wrist with brutal precision. Sawyer screamed, the rifle clattering onto the rocks. Thor growled, driving him backward toward the cliff edge. Sawyer swung wildly, punching at the dog's ribs, but Thor held on, eyes blazing, body pinned like a trained missile. Reed stumbled forward. Thor, out! The shepherd dropped back instantly, giving Reed a clear line of sight. Sawyer scrambled to his knees, reaching for the fallen weapon. Reed fired. The bullet struck the ground beside Sawyer's hand, close enough to sting his knuckles. I said it ends here. Sawyer froze, breath trembling. His eyes darted to the cliff, then to Thor, then back to Reed. The fight drained out of him in slow, visible waves. He lifted his hands, shaking. Reed stepped forward, cuffing him with a swift, practiced motion. Above them, a low thunder rolled through the sky. Mia looked up. A black federal helicopter tore through the cloud cover, rotors cutting the air with a heavy, rhythmic chop. Two more followed behind it, sweeping the ridge with searchlights. Wade exhaled sharply. That's not search and rescue. That's the FBI. The first helicopter descended toward a clearing near the ravine. Agents in dark, tactical uniforms jumped out, rifles raised, fanning toward the chaos with clinical precision. One agent spotted Mia waving the flashlight. We have the signal. Visual on the girl. Move in. Within seconds, the forest filled with voices, shouts, and the pounding of boots on snow. Two medics ran toward Reed. Another pair secured Sawyer and dragged him toward the chopper. A third squad headed toward Brent, carrying a stretcher between them. Reed sagged slightly as a medic wrapped gauze around his bleeding arm, but he refused to sit until he saw Mia. She ran to him, skidding across the frozen ground. Thor bounded after her, tail wagging, fur matted with snow and sweat. Reed dropped to one knee, wincing but smiling. You did it, he breathed. Mia shook her head. Thor did most of it. Thor nudged her chest with his nose, panting heavily. Reed placed a hand gently on her shoulder. Mia, you didn't just save my life. You saved the truth. Her throat tightened. Is it really over? Not yet, Reed said softly. But it will be. As if on cue, one of the agents approached, holding up something in a sealed evidence bag. Found it in your coat pocket, the USB drive. Truckloads of data. If this is what we think it is, Vance is done. Mia looked at Reed, eyes wide. A new voice came through the agent's radio. All units stand by. High-value arrest in progress. Suspect Logan Vance located at his residence. The lead helicopter shifted overhead, its side door opening to a mounted camera crew streaming live to federal servers. The agent smirked slightly. Director wants the whole town to see this. In a mountain mansion miles away, Logan Vance stepped out onto his deck, sipping coffee as if the world belonged to him. His robe fluttered in the wind. He raised an eyebrow at the sight of the first helicopter circling. Then he saw the red laser dot settle on his chest. You're making a mistake, officers, he called out. The second helicopter descended. The camera zoomed in. Agents poured across his lawn. "Logan Vance, you are under arrest for conspiracy, weapons trafficking, attempted murder of a law enforcement officer, and corruption within the state of Colorado." Vance tried to retreat, but 2 agents pinned him against the wall. The live stream screen split into 4 angles, every second broadcast across the internet and straight into the phones of Timber Valley citizens. Back at the ravine, Reed watched the footage from an agent's tablet. His jaw clenched. About time. Mia leaned closer, stunned. People are watching him get arrested? "The whole country," the agent said. "Your signals led us straight to him." Reed placed a steady arm around Mia, pulling her into a brief embrace. Thor pressed against them both, letting out a low, content rumble. "You brought the light back to this place." Reed whispered. Mia swallowed hard, eyes burning. Wade stepped forward, arms crossed, emotion hidden beneath his gruff tone. "Not bad for a kid who almost skipped school today." Reed chuckled softly. Thor nudged Mia again, tail lifting. For the first time since morning, the forest felt less cold, less haunted. A medic approached. "Helicopters ready for transport. All of you are coming with us." Reed glanced down at Mia. "Ready, kid?" She nodded, gripping Thor's collar. "Yeah, I think I am." The helicopter rotors roared, lifting snow into the air like a tide of white fire. Mia, Reed, Wade, and Thor stepped into the open cabin, bathed in the rising sun. Justice had finally arrived. And something new, something healing, was just beginning. Spring came slowly to Timber Valley, brushing away the last of the winter scars. The snow melted in thin silver rivers along the sidewalks, revealing grass that struggled to return after the brutal cold. The world looked softer now, gentler, as if the town itself was finally allowed to exhale. Mia Carter stood outside Timber Valley Community Hospital, clutching a paper bag of homemade cookies. Her mother had baked them that morning, insisting that heroes deserved something warm. Mia didn't feel like a hero, but she didn't argue. She stepped inside. The hallways were quiet, washed in soft yellow light. Nurses moved calmly from room to room. Flowers lined the bulletin board near reception, along with a newspaper clipping pinned at the center. "The bravest kid in Timber Valley, local 11-year-old, helps save officer and K-9 partner from ambush." Mia looked away quickly when she saw the picture of herself. Her cheeks flushed. She still wasn't used to people pointing, whispering, or smiling proudly at her. She definitely wasn't used to being recognized at the grocery store, at school, or walking down Main Street. She shook off the feeling and followed the hallway to the physical therapy wing. At the door, she heard a familiar bark. Mia grinned and pushed it open. Thor lay comfortably on a padded dog bed near Reed's hospital recliner, his bandages mostly gone, fur grown back over the scars. He lifted his head as soon as he smelled her, ears perked, and scrambled up with a burst of energy that made the nurses flinch. Thor kept himself from jumping on her. Reed's strict command lived deep in him, so he pressed his head against Mia's chest instead, tail sweeping the floor like a broom. Mia dropped to her knees and hugged him fully, burying her face in his neck. "I missed you too," she whispered. Reed laughed from the recliner. "Careful, kid. He's been sulking all morning waiting for you. Thought he'd start chewing the bed just to get attention." Mia looked up. Reed looked better. Still pale, stiff and slow, but better. His right arm was strapped into a brace, his ribs heavily taped, but he was awake, alert, alive. The bullet damage had taken weeks to stabilize, and then more weeks to begin healing. 2 months in the hospital, and he still had another month to go before he'd be allowed back behind a steering wheel. "You look stronger," Mia said. "That's because they finally let me have coffee again." Reed joked. A nurse passing by shook her head. "Half a cup. Don't exaggerate, Officer Dalton. Reed held up his hand. Semantics. Mia giggled. She sat in the chair beside him, Thor's head resting in her lap, warm and heavy. Reed watched the two of them for a moment, a soft smile settling into the corners of his mouth. "How's school treating you?" he asked. "Weird," Mia replied honestly. "Everyone keeps asking me what happened, and teachers keep pulling me into the hallway to check if I'm okay." "Are you?" Mia hesitated. She didn't want to lie. "Sometimes I still hear the fire, and the explosion, and when a car backfires, it sounds like the shot that hit you." Thor lifted his head, sensing her change of mood. He nudged her chin gently. Reed leaned forward, wincing as his ribs protested. "It fades," he said quietly. "Not all at once, not overnight. But it does fade, and until it does, you're allowed to feel however you feel." Mia looked at him, searching his eyes. "Did it fade for you?" Reed let out a slow breath. "Not yet. But it's getting there." She nodded. A sharp knock sounded at the door. Wade stepped inside, wearing a clean flannel shirt and the same old weather-beaten boots he'd had on the night everything changed. His beard was trimmed, his hair brushed, and his posture straighter than Mia had ever seen. "Afternoon," he said, voice gravelly but warm. Thor barked happily and trotted over to him. Wade scratched behind the shepherd's ears. "Still guarding them, huh?" "Always," Reed said. Wade pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket and handed it to Mia. "What's this?" she asked. "Open it." She unfolded the paper. It was a flyer. Timber Valley Heroes Banquet honoring Wade Everett, Reed Dalton, K9 Thor, and Mia Carter. Mia blinked. "They're doing a ceremony?" "The whole town," Wade replied. "The mayor's planning it at the high school gym. Free food, band music, all that small-town stuff." Reed smirked. "You know the mayor loves a spotlight." Wade cleared his throat awkwardly. "They want the four of us on stage. Said we symbolize something important." Mia tilted her head. "Symbolize what?" Wade hesitated. Then he answered with surprising softness. "That even in a place this quiet, people will still stand up for what's right." Mia's chest tightened. She didn't know what to say. Reed gestured toward the paper bag she had brought. "You gonna let me see what's in there, or is that just for decoration?" Mia laughed and handed him the cookies. "Just don't let Thor steal any." "Mom put real chocolate chips in them this time." Reed raised an eyebrow. "Well, now I'm nervous." Thor gave a single loud bark, as if offended at being restricted. Mia stroked the dog's neck. "You saved us that day," she whispered to him. Reed nodded slowly. "He did. But so did you." Before she could answer, Dr. Elkins stepped into the room. "Reed, time for your session. No arguing today." Reed groaned in dramatic misery. Physical therapy is just fancy torture. Mia stood up, smoothing Thor's fur one last time. "We'll come back tomorrow." Thor followed her to the door, nudging her hand. She bent down and kissed the top of his head. Wade placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You did good, kid." As they walked down the hallway together, Mia glanced at the bulletin board again. Her picture stared back at her, smiling, brave, a little scared. She didn't feel like that girl every day. But maybe heroism wasn't a constant. Maybe it was something you stepped into when the world needed it. Outside, the spring air was cool but hopeful. Timber Valley felt alive again. And for the first time in months, Mia believed the worst was behind them. At least for now. The sun was bright over Timber Valley, the kind of warm Colorado morning that made the mountains look almost golden. Families gathered on the newly paved courtyard outside the old fire station, which had been rebuilt, expanded, and painted with a fresh sign. Timber Valley K9 Rescue and Training Center dedicated to the guardians who stood their ground. Kids waved tiny flags. Local reporters set up their cameras. The mayor straightened his tie for the 10th time. The entire town had turned out for the grand opening. Mia Carter stood near the front row, hands clasped tightly, her heart thudding with nervous excitement. Thor sat beside her like a statue, chest proud, ears alert. The shepherd wore a new harness with a polished badge reading K9 Thor, Unit 01. He nudged her leg, sensing her jitters. "I'm fine," Mia whispered, giving him a small smile. "You're the one everyone's here to see." Thor responded by lifting his chin even higher. Up on the temporary stage, Reed Dalton adjusted the microphone. His arm was still wrapped in a supportive sleeve, but his posture was solid again. Months of rehab had brought him nearly back to full strength, though he carried himself with a little more gratitude, a little more weight. Behind him, a giant ribbon stretched across the new double doors of the training center. Wade Everett stood near Reed, hands stuffed in his pockets, looking deeply uncomfortable with attention. He wore a clean jacket, a rarity that made half the town do a double-take. A few rows back, Brent Sawyer sat between two federal agents. His left arm was in a sling, and his expression was solemn, but his eyes no longer held the haunted look he once carried. His plea deal had been granted, reduced sentence plus mandatory community service. He had earned that mercy by stepping between Mia and a bullet. When he caught Mia looking, he gave her a small nod. Mia returned it without hesitation. Reed waited until the murmuring settled. Then his voice carried clear and steady across the courtyard. "Thank you all for being here. 6 months ago, Timber Valley faced something none of us expected. Corruption, violence, secrets buried under our quiet town. And yet, even in the middle of that darkness, something else showed up. Courage." He glanced toward Mia and Thor. "Heroes come in all sizes. Some barely reach my shoulder." The crowd laughed gently. Mia's face flushed bright red. Thor gave a proud bark, earning a wave of applause. Reed continued, "This center exists because bravery isn't just something you see in movies or big cities. It's here, in old firefighters who don't hesitate to run toward danger, in young officers who choose to do the right thing at the very last second, in kids who refuse to back down when life gives them an impossible choice." His gaze lingered on Brent. Brent swallowed hard. "And in K9s who give everything for the people they love." Thor barked again, loud and sharp, almost perfectly timed. The crowd broke into cheers. Several kids lifted handmade signs with Thor's paw print painted in blue. Reed stepped aside, inviting Wade forward. The older man cleared his throat. "I don't talk much. Most of you know that. But I'll say this. What happened last winter showed me something. We don't get to choose when danger comes, but we do get to choose who we stand with. This place is for training guardians, dogs, and people." He paused, struggling with the next words. "I'm proud of this town, proud of that girl, proud of this dog." Thor walked over and pressed his head into Wade's hip. Wade froze, then awkwardly scratched behind the shepherd's ear as the crowd chuckled. Reed lifted the ceremonial scissors. "It's time." He handed them to Mia instead. The mayor blinked in surprise. Reed nodded at her. "Go on. You earned it." Mia stepped forward. Her hands trembled slightly as she took the scissors. Excitement, nerves, and something deeper swirled together. Thor stood at her side, tail flicking. "Ready?" Reed asked. She nodded. She cut the ribbon in one clean motion. The courtyard erupted in applause. The doors swung open, revealing a bright facility inside. Padded training floors, kennels lined with soft bedding, a small infirmary, and a display wall dedicated to K9 heroes from around the country. Mia stepped inside first. Thor followed, sniffing everything with the keen focus of a dog who knew this was his place now. Kids crowded around Thor, asking if he could do tricks. Thor responded by sitting perfectly straight, holding a paw up for each child who asked. Laughter filled the room. Brent watched from the doorway, guarded but quietly moved. One of the federal agents murmured something to him. "You keep cooperating like this, and you might walk out of here sooner than you think." Brent's nod was almost imperceptible. Reed approached him. "You made the right call that day." Brent met his eyes. "Took me long enough." Reed offered a hand. Brent hesitated, then shook it firmly. Mia wandered toward a new plaque on the wall near the entrance. It read, "To those who choose courage when fear is easier, to those who run toward the cry for help, and to the future guardians of Timber Valley." Thor sat beside her, looking up as if he understood every word. "This is your place now," she whispered. Thor gently bumped her with his head. Reed approached from behind. "He's not the only one who belongs here." Mia looked up. "What do you mean?" "I talked with the mayor, with Wade, and with the sheriff's department." Reed crouched down beside her. "We want you to be our junior honorary handler, first in the program." Thor approves. Thor barked sharply, tongue lolling. Mia's eyes widened. "Really?" Reed nodded. "You saved us, Mia. This center exists because of you." "And I don't think Thor would take no for an answer." Thor nudged her again, as if confirming it. Emotion welled in Mia's chest. She couldn't stop the smile that stretched across her face. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll do it." Reed stood and looked out over the bustling room, where the town buzzed with new energy, hope, and pride. Timber Valley had changed, because a little girl refused to walk past a burning car, because a K9 refused to give up, because truth had finally taken root where corruption once hid. A new chapter had begun, and this time it belonged to everyone. The interview room inside the newly opened Timber Valley K9 Rescue Center looked small on camera, but in person it felt warm. Soft afternoon light washed through the windows, catching motes of dust in the air. The flag of Colorado hung on one wall, and beside it, a framed photo of Thor in his new harness. Reporters from Denver, Boulder, and even one from out of state lined up with their microphones and notepads. They had come for a story about a town that refused to look away, a cop who survived the impossible, and a little girl whose courage had shaken an entire criminal network. But most of all, they were here for the dog whose bark had changed everything. Mia sat in a small wooden chair, feet not quite touching the floor, hands folded nervously in her lap. Thor lay at her side, body stretched out, ears flicking every time a camera shutter clicked. His tail thumped once each time she glanced down at him, as if to remind her he was there. Reed stood behind them, still recovering but steady enough to lean on the podium. Wade was off to the side, arms crossed, pretending he hated attention even though he'd shown up in the cleanest jacket anyone had ever seen him wear. The room quieted as the lead reporter stepped forward. "Mia, I think everyone wants to understand something. Why did you risk your life for them? You're 11 years old. Most kids would have run for help. You ran into a burning car." Mia inhaled, eyes flickering briefly toward Thor. She reached out and placed her hand gently on his head. Thor's eyes softened, and his breathing grew slow and steady under her palm. "He wasn't just a dog in danger," she said quietly. Her voice filled the room, small but anchored. "He was someone waiting for help, just like Officer Reed, someone who didn't have anyone else in that moment." Cameras clicked. Someone in the back sniffed. Mia kept speaking, choosing each word with careful honesty. "I didn't think I was saving heroes. I didn't even think I was doing something brave. I just saw someone trapped and scared. And I thought, if it were me in that car, I'd hope someone would stop. Thor nudged her knee gently, as if agreeing. The reporter lowered her microphone, visibly moved. She nodded once, stepping back. Another journalist turned toward Reed. "Officer Dalton, what do you think made her decision so extraordinary?" Reed looked down at Mia, then at Thor, then back at the sea of cameras pointed at him. There was a quiet certainty in his expression, the kind that came from months of survival, recovery, and reflection. "I think bravery isn't loud. It's not explosive. It doesn't always look like what you expect." He paused. That morning, in the middle of the fire, in the middle of fear, she chose not to run. And Thor, he chose to trust her. That's what saved us. Thor's ears perked at his name. He shifted upright, sitting tall, chest broad, gaze steady. It was almost like he understood that this moment belonged partly to him, too. A soft laugh rippled through the room as the cameras zoomed in on him. "One final question for both of you," the first reporter said. "Something that sums up this entire journey." She gestured toward Reed. "Officer Dalton, what would you want people to take away from all this?" Reed glanced toward the forest outside the window. Snow still clung to the edges of the tree line, even though spring had arrived. Birds were singing somewhere distant, and for a heartbeat, Thor turned his head sharply, ears lifting, staring into that same stretch of woods as if he heard something only he could understand. The room fell silent. Reed looked back at the cameras. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "What's your story with a loyal pet?" The question hung in the air, soft, honest, and wide open. The cameraman zoomed on Thor. His eyes were bright, deep, focused on the world beyond the glass. It was as if he could still sense everything that had happened, everything that had almost gone wrong, every echo of danger he'd answered. And somehow, it also looked like he was listening for the next call that might come. Mia leaned her head against him. Thor pressed closer. The reporters lowered their cameras. The room seemed to breathe out in unison. Outside the rescue center, kids were already playing on the training field. A couple walked their own German Shepherd past the new sign. Another family pointed at the building with excitement, talking about adopting a dog soon. Timber Valley was changing, growing, healing. Because one girl refused to walk away, because one cop trusted her, and because one shepherd chose to protect until the very last second. Reed placed a hand on Mia's shoulder. "You did more than save us," he said quietly. "You reminded an entire town what courage looks like." Mia wiped her eye, embarrassed. Thor stood, tail wagging now, as if to remind her this wasn't a sad ending. This was the beginning of something bigger. The cameras kept rolling. The room filled with applause. Thor barked once, loud and strong, almost like a closing statement. And somewhere, deep in the mountains, the wind carried that sound farther than anyone realized. As the screen fades, the narrator's voice rises softly. If this story touched your heart, support the channel. Celebrate the loyalty, courage, and spirit of the German Shepherd. Share your own story with us. What's your story with a loyal pet?